Welcome to Training Your VISTAs Remotely, a webinar for AmeriCorps VISTA leaders. Many VISTA leaders support a team of VISTAs spread out across one or more states. And now that health precautions have many VISTAs teleserving, much of a leader's work is done remotely, including training. I'm your host, Andy King, Senior Training Specialist with AmeriCorps VISTA. Our presenter is Erin Barnhart. As founder and president of Effective Altruism, LLC, Erin has created and delivered numerous trainings and resources on volunteer engagement, national service, and career development for volunteers, interns, students, and service learning organizations worldwide. A former Fulbright scholar and an AmeriCorps NCCC alum, Dr. Barnhart earned her PhD in Urban Studies, studying international civic engagement. Today, she joins us to offer her insights on how to train your VISTAs remotely. Later in the session, we'll be joined by Tiffany Okolo, an AmeriCorps VISTA leader serving at the Alliance of Arizona Nonprofits. Erin, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Andy. I am delighted to be here. This session brings together two topics that I am especially passionate about, VISTA and training. So to get us started, let's look at the three learning outcomes for our time together today. First, you'll be prepared to describe the key cornerstones of effective remote trainings. Next, you'll be able to identify engaging remote training activities and processes to use with your VISTAs. And then finally, you'll be ready to determine ways to adapt training activities for remote delivery. Okay, so let's kick things off by discussing the four cornerstones of effective remote trainings, as well as an important factor at the center of your process, your remote training outcomes. Learning outcomes, sometimes called objectives, are statements that express what participants will be able to do as a result of an educational or training event. For the learner, they identify what behaviors and skills should be gained due to their participation. And for us, the instructors, they provide guidance and direction for the lesson. If an instructor gets off track during a session, you can use your learning outcomes to refocus and ensure that the desired learning outcomes are achieved. An easy process to create outcomes is to start with the end in mind by asking yourself, what do I want my learners to be able to do as a result of their participation in this training? This can be knowledge acquisition, like describe the systemic roots of poverty, or it can be developing a skill, like becoming a more effective grant writer. Clear learning outcomes should start with a phrase like, as a result of this training, participants will be able to XYZ. Next, make sure you use an action verb that describes what the learner will be able to demonstrate as a result of the learning. Some good examples of action verbs include identify, perform, describe, critique, organize, differentiate, discuss, and explain. And finally, you'll want to specify what the learner will be doing to demonstrate achievement of each objective. So pulling this all together, an example for today might be, as a result of today's webinar, the VISTA leader participant should be able to use the self-assessment tool to identify training needs for all members of their team at the beginning of the service year.
All right, let's take a minute to practice brainstorming outcomes. So if you think back to the question that we asked at the beginning of the session, and I know that most of you didn't have a chance to respond to it, but we had asked then to think about a training topic that you led in person that you might like to lead online. So if you think of that, think of a particular training that you have, imagine that you're developing a remote training on that topic, and you're coming up with an outcome for the session. So what is one example of an appropriate learning outcome for your training? Remember to use an action verb to finish this sentence. As a result of this training, participants should be able to ... When you're ready, please type your response in the chat and send it to all panelists and attendees. That way everyone will be able to see your response. All right, so a few of you have your responses coming in already. Let's see, Tim says, should be able to create a basic website for their organization. Jennifer says, lead an effective community meeting. Megan, administer proper first aid in case of medical emergencies. Create an 8-dimensional wellness plan. Navigate channels and teams. Boy, I could use that one. Harrison, maybe you can help me there. Let's see, evaluate their work from home practices to identify weak areas. Lead volunteers. Collaborate with parents and families. All right, so lots of great examples there. Erin, any of these stand out to you?
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, there's some really great examples here. I'm seeing lots of nice, concrete, focused examples. So manage social media, lead volunteers, evaluate practices, really good use of action verbs. And again, really focused on something that is measurable and you can draw a direct line between they come to my training, I want them to be able to do or know this. So really nice examples here. Thank you everyone for participating and starting this process. Obviously this was a very quick version of this exercise, but you'd want to spend some time with this for any remote training that you're developing and create one like you did today, but also 2 to 4 more for any real trainings. And then once you've crafted them, and thus you know what you most want to accomplish, then you're going to be ready to create a training design and structure to reach these outcomes and be able to align your practices with what you hope to achieve. Okay, so now let's go back to our cornerstones and discuss content. This is the what of what you'll be training on. First, you're going to want to make sure that your training content is thorough and provides your VISTAs with the knowledge and skill information that they will need to succeed. Again, ensuring that it aligns with your training outcomes. Like all trainings, whether in person or online, you'll also want to consider the breadth of the content you're going to cover. What is an appropriate scale and scope for the topic that you're presenting? How broad do you need or want to go? And how much can you reasonably cover in the time you have available? Next, think about depth. Again, consider your outcomes for the training and the time that you have. Can you dive deep into a topic, or do you need to keep it pretty high level? If you're not sure about the best parameters for your breadth and depth, start by crafting it as a broader training and then hone it in to find the right balance between general knowledge and specific expertise. For remote trainings, you'll also want to think about how much you can cover in your allotted time while still maintaining their attention and participation. While you can sometimes go broader and more general in an in-person training and still keep the room pretty engaged, it is much more difficult and there are many more distractions when your audience is online. So really focus in and create a tight body of content to help them stay focused, interested, and connected to what you're teaching. Finally, when thinking about content, do your participants bring knowledge with them that you need to draw out? Ideally, training shouldn't be framed as a blank slate experience, especially with adults who bring a lot of life experiences with them. Instead, build knowledge by tying your training content to things your participants already know. This will help to both increase learning and provide relevance and context to their learning. Okay, so delivery is one of the areas most unique to remote training, as you're going to need to rethink and reimagine more traditional methods for sharing training content and engaging your audience. Here are a few ways you can do this. First, you'll want to consider how you organize your content. If you're covering a big or a deep topic, break it up into smaller pieces that are easier to remember. If you can, share content with your learners before, during, and after the training using platforms and formats that are accessible for folks with all different kinds of understanding and tech capacity. Also, think about potentially creating a shared folder on Google Drive or another site where you can save handouts, readings, tip sheets, etc. It doesn't matter where you host it, as long as it's a place that everyone can easily access. Next, consider the specifics of adult learning. Spend some time brainstorming training methods that align best with the motivations and learning styles of adult learners. Adults bring experience, so you're going to want to draw on that during the training. Similarly, adults learn best when content is relevant to their role and rooted in their personal and professional experience, skills, and knowledge. So be sure to offer real-world examples and tie it back to their work as VISTAs. Adults often focus on problem solving, so you'll ideally want to craft some activities that offer your VISTA members opportunities to learn by experiencing or practicing what they're learning. Also, be sure to offer opportunities for them to self-direct or customize their learning and activities wherever possible, even if this means assigning a bit of light homework for them to define their own path for further learning and practice. At the same time, keep in mind that adult learners aren't a monolith. While they may have many similarities, they are also a group of people who likely all learn in very different ways. For example, I am a very visual learner, so I like to see writing and images when I'm in an online training. Others are more auditory, so they need something compelling to listen to, while others still are kinesthetic learners who need to experience something in order to understand it. When you're leading a remote training for a team, chances are pretty good that you'll have all three of these kinds of learners and possibly many more in your audience. So try to incorporate activities and delivery methods that engage all of these various styles. Now, your training is going to be a mix of presentation and activities so that your learners have opportunities to actively engage with the material rather than just passively observing it. We're going to talk more about activities in just a few minutes. But first, I want to touch on relevance. Adults learn best when they can see how the learning is relevant to their lives. Highlighting the relevance, aka what's in it for me, builds motivation for learning and retaining knowledge. Again, ideally, all trainings would be tailored to be specifically relevant to the audience. However, it is even more important with remote trainings because of those aforementioned distractions and ability to lose their attention. So, remembering that adult learners respond best to content that aligns with their experiences, be sure your training content and examples are relevant to their roles as VISTAs. Likewise, adults are focused on how to apply what they learn, so whenever possible, be sure the activities you use mirror what they might encounter in their service. Also, draw parallels for them that demonstrate how these new practices and methods align with their existing skills and experiences. For example, maybe you have a former teacher on your team who will be doing fundraising. You can help her understand how to connect the two by considering how communicating with a potential funder is similar to tailoring a lesson for a student. It's all about who they are, what they need, and how you can best connect them to your message. Lastly, make it timely. Fundraising practices may be somewhat universal, but fundraising also looks very different in the age of COVID-19. Similarly, recruiting volunteers right now looks a little different with so many people quarantining at home. So be sure to tie what you're teaching them to what they will be experiencing in their service at this moment. Also, provide the training as close to the time when they're going to need the information as you can. Okay, lastly, there's continuity. Whether you're offering a one-time training or a series of learning opportunities, remote trainings can become stickier and more impactful by placing them within a continuum of learning, a process that begins before your training and continues after everyone has clicked leave meeting. For example, before your training, you might offer opportunities for individual pre-learning through readings, worksheets, and independent activities. Then after the training, you might offer continued learning opportunities, both individual like reflection activities, strategic planning worksheets, more readings, or as a team through team projects and collective planning, online discussion groups, fun interactive activities like online scavenger hunts, or even microblogs and Tumblr feeds where team members post and share photos, snippets of stories about their day, questions to consider, and little reflections on what they've learned with each other. Relationship development and collaboration are two additional big themes in continuity. Not only do you want participants to learn what you're teaching them, again, before, during, and after your training, but you're also building and reinforcing connections. When designing your training, especially when thinking about appropriate activities, spend time thinking about how you can best build and reinforce relationships, both as a group and with you as their leader. And after the training is over, incorporate ongoing connection practices like checking in with them and each other by text or instant message, creating a Slack channel with a question of the day, launching peer groups or listservs to make it easy for people to share ideas or ask questions by sending one email or submitting one post, etc. In short, the closer they feel to each other and to you, the more you can help to foster and sustain the strength of your team. Now, in a few minutes, you're going to hear from Tiffany, a current VISTA leader, on some of the ways she's helped to create a dynamic culture of respect for her team through online practices. Lastly, keep asking them questions. What do they want to learn next? What kinds of trainings should you offer? What did they like about the last one? What didn't they like? What kinds of resources do they need? Where might they feel isolated? How can you help with that? Gather their feedback through direct check-ins, evaluation polls, and short monthly or even quarterly online surveys. And then keep the wheels turning for what they want or need next so that you can help to provide it. So let's jump back to the delivery cornerstone to talk more about learning activities. Specifically, let's talk about why they are important to incorporate into your remote training. First, activities offer an opportunity for your learners to engage with the content actively, rather than simply as a passive viewer. Next, activities can provide a way for people to apply what they are learning to a real-world issue, taking knowledge from a conceptual framework and then applying it in real-life experience. Activities can also provide an opportunity for people to practice what they are learning, as well as to gather feedback from you and their peers. Activities also reinforce what they are learning. If I'm passively listening or reading information, it might stick, but if I participate in an activity where I'm engaged, that is going to be even more memorable. Also, don't overlook the importance of fun. Yes, what you're teaching is important, but we also want people to enjoy the process of learning. This again helps to reinforce their learning as well. People are more likely to remember new information if it is tied to a positive memory than if it is received via passive delivery. Lastly, activities are a great way to maintain your learners' attention. This is true even in in-person trainings, but it's especially true during a remote event. People are very easily distracted online. More interesting topics are literally just a click away, but they have to stay present when they're being asked to do something interactive. So keep their attention by engaging their attention. Now, I've hopefully sold you on the importance of incorporating activities into your remote training. So let's briefly explore how you can best identify why, when, where, and how to utilize them. Starting with the why. So we've already talked in general about why activities are important in training. So let's look at why we might use a particular type of activity. Start by reflecting on the overall learning outcomes and goals for your training. Keep these front of mind as you start to brainstorm activities to incorporate. Now I want you to go a little deeper and set a few outcomes specific to the activities. What do you want your attendees to gain from participation? Is it an opportunity for them to practice new methods or concepts? Or is it more focused on developing stronger connections to you or each other? Lastly, confirm that the outcomes for your activities still align with your desired outcomes for the overall training. Do they run parallel or are they at odds? For example, if all of your learning outcomes for the overall training are specific to participants gaining and practicing a new skill, but your activities are focused on relationship development, then you have a bit of a disconnect. Spend some time here to make sure that activities enhance and aid your learning objectives rather than potentially confuse the outcome. Once you're clear on the why, then you want to think about the how. How can you effectively enhance the delivery of your training content through activities? Given your desired outcomes for the training, what kinds of activities are most relevant and the best fit for your session? Activities where people reflect and respond individually, activities where they collaborate with each other in pairs or small groups, or maybe activities where they communicate with you and everyone else in the training as one cohesive group. Keep those different learning styles in mind and try to offer activities that will appeal to different folks. Also, be sure to think about the available time and tools you have at your disposal. What can you easily accommodate using your video conference platform? What can you incorporate using other tools? What can you realistically fit within the time frame you have available? Remember, you can always incorporate activities as part of pre-training and post-training learning as well. Don't forget to also think about what kinds of activities would be most engaging, appealing, and fun. It won't matter that you have an amazing learning opportunity at the ready for them if no one wants to do it and everyone hates participating. And just because a topic is serious doesn't mean the activity can't be fun. Get creative and offer opportunities for enjoyment while they learn. Next, let's think about when those activities should take place. Start by thinking about the length of your overall training. How much time do you need to present information versus facilitating activities? And what should the balance ideally be between receiving new information and participating in activities? Also think about timing within the overall outline. Do you want activities to follow a section where you've presented new methods or practices and now you're providing a chance for them to get some hands-on experience? Or do you want to start with an activity to get people connected to the topic and then dive deeper into presenting new info? Similarly, do you want to incorporate activities that you can complete from start to finish during your remote training? Or does it make more sense to do an activity that spans a longer period of time? It might start before the training with a pre-workshop task, or it could start during the training and then charge them with an assignment to take next steps after. Decide if you want one or more of your activities to stand on their own or to be part of your continuum of learning. And then finally, similar to when, think about where within your training an activity makes the most sense. Spend some time exploring your available tools. Can you facilitate your activity using tools within your video conference platform? Do you need participants to access additional tools like Google Docs or a shared workspace? Knowing the tools you have available will help you decide best where the activity should take place. Be sure to also go back to your answers for when and determine the where by reflecting on your timing. If it's something that would be best incorporated as part of your learning continuum, then it might make more sense for the activities to take place outside of your training. Or if you decided you wanted standalone activities, then you'll need to figure out where in your outline the activities fit, the tools you have available, and then where and how you'll facilitate them. Overall, it's important that you be intentional with how, where, when, and why you incorporate activities into your training. And the more you can align them with your desired outcomes for the remote training, the more you can ensure that they are an appropriate and dynamic fit. Okay, now let's chat about possible activities you can weave into your remote training. I'm going to share 4 examples on the screen here, but you'll find even more in the handout that you received. We'll also dive a little deeper into and practice an additional option later in this training. So first, there are many ways that you can create opportunities for brainstorming, idea sharing, and discussions. Depending on the size of your team, you might want to facilitate discussions all together as one big group. Using the chat box or taking turns speaking, you can use the raise hand function that most video conference platforms have in order to share the mic with one another. Or you might want to split your team into smaller groups, again using the chat box or hand raising, or if your online tool allows it, like Zoom does, you can even use breakout rooms. You can also assign people into smaller groups and then give them instructions for meeting post-training to practice and support one another in ongoing learning. However you structure it, discussion group activities offer opportunities for your VISTAs to be in a creative space for identifying new ideas, as well as to get critical feedback on those ideas from their peers. It's also a great way to further develop relationships on your team. Another option is to walk your team through guided online demos and simulations of key tasks and tools so that they can see firsthand what it should look like. Use screen share and go slowly so that they can see every step that you complete as you go. If it's an online tool, you can also then give everyone a few minutes to mute their mics and go try it for themselves. Then, after a set period of time, reconvene everyone to share challenges they experienced or questions they realized when they were trying it out for themselves. This kind of activity makes it easier for your VISTAs to see exactly how something should go, how they should complete a task, what a platform looks like, what their experience might be like when they practice it themselves. This is especially important for the visual and kinesthetic learners on your team. And again, by offering a chance for them to share challenges and ask questions, it reinforces those important team connections. A third option is to do some role-playing and/or collective planning for real-world scenarios. Ask for a volunteer from your team to role-play with you in live time what it looks like when you implement a specific practice or a strategy. You might also give them time to do some quick brainstorming and preliminary planning individually, and then, after a predetermined amount of time, bring them back as a full group to share what they've discovered. You might even send them off after the training in small teams to share strategies and get feedback on their ideas on a more ongoing basis. Now, I know not everyone loves a role-playing activity, but most people do indeed gain something from it, especially your more experiential learners. By demonstrating a role play for the group, you can also show them what an experience could or should look like. Similarly, collective planning sessions offer them space to collaborate with their peers and to start applying what they're learning in the training immediately to the role as a VISTA. Lastly, a powerful fourth option is reflection. Reflection can be an important remote training activity because it provides space and opportunity for your team members to consider what they are learning, how they might apply new information and ideas they're accruing at their site, and how it connects to their previous personal and professional experiences. In fact, reflection has also been shown through academic research to be a powerful way for people to incorporate what they've learned into the context of their own experiences and memories, making it even stickier and more personal. To lead reflection with your team, you might incorporate a standalone reflection activity into your training, just like we did at the beginning of today's webinar, posting a question that you ask them to take a moment to think about and reflect on. You can then ask them to share their responses with each other in the chat box or even in small groups. You might also assign it as a post-training activity, either something that they do one time as follow-up homework or on an ongoing basis. For the latter idea, you might even provide them with writing prompts and questions from time to time that they can consider and then write about. Keep in mind that you'll want to decide whether or not they are going to then share these responses with others on their team. Reflection can be structured as an exercise for each person's own personal growth and development, or it can be something that is meant to spark conversation with their peers. Either way, be sure to let them know whether what they are writing is going to be read by anyone else, as this may affect what they decide to write about and what they're comfortable sharing. Whether facilitated during the training or before or after it, reflection can make the experience an exchange that isn't about one-way learning, but rather about immediately turning new ideas into applicable and personally relevant concepts and practices.
All right, so now we have another chat activity for you. Consider everything that Erin just covered, and going back to the training topic that you may have thought about earlier, and the one that you brainstormed the learning outcome for, think about this question. What is an example of an activity that you might incorporate into your remote training to engage your audience? So when you're ready, please enter your ideas in the chat. Remember to select all panelists and attendees so that everyone will be able to see your response. All right, so we've got a couple in here already. Having VISTAs talk about the projects that they're working on, watching a TED Talk together and then discussing it as a group, using screen share to show how to schedule a Facebook post, for example, or really any sort of online tech thing you can use, remote screen share, role-playing different situations, create a pre-activity sheet, adding a file to a folder in Teams. Let's see, using team discussions in Zoom breakout groups, brainstorming project ideas, building a logic model. Let's see, and adding pre-meeting reading materials in the meeting invitation. All right, lots of great examples here. Erin, any of these standouts for you?
Yeah, there's such good examples here. And one of the things I really noted is all the different learning styles they incorporate. So there's writing on your own, there's creating a plan together, there's free writing, there's writing for a prompt, there's readings, there's Zoom polls and breakout groups. And you know, we're sharing all of these examples here, and certainly you probably will do more than one type of activity during a training, depending on that balance between content and activities. So it's nice to see this range of opportunities that people are open to and can incorporate into their training. So thank you so much, everyone, for sharing these examples. And I actually saw someone, I think it was Megan, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, mentioned doing quizzes and polls. So you basically did a spoiler alert there, because we're going to practice a remote training activity together right now, which is a game like training Jeopardy. So games can be a really great way to inject some quick pace and interactive energy into your training. They can also be facilitated fairly easy using the tools in your video conference platform like polls. So here's how it might work for a round of training Jeopardy. Before the training, create a list of trivia questions that you want your team members to answer. They can be directly related to your training content. Say if your training is about grant writing, you might have them define what RFP stands for. Or it can be more general, like fun facts about the state or communities in which your team serves. You can then have them answer in one of three ways. The first option is whoever raises their hand, or if your online platform doesn't offer that feature, they can type, BZZ bzz into the chat box and then have them answer by voice. A second option is whoever types their full answer into the chat box the fastest. Or a third option, you can create quick and easy polls so that everyone answers and they'll all see the total percentage of who got it right. And that's a little different instead of having an individual answerer. All three of these options use tools readily accessible in most webinar and remote meeting platforms. And the point of the game is to test and help to further solidify their knowledge in a fun, interactive way, all hopefully while building some memories and relationships with you and each other as a team. So given the size of our group today, we're going to play just one quick round using option number 3, where we're all going to answer together. So in a moment, you'll see a poll on your screen. So go ahead and submit your answer when you're ready. And after about 30 seconds, I will close the poll so that we can see all the results. So we have the question here, what is the overall poverty rate in America? And I see the results coming in. And the options folks had here is 8%, 12%, 19%, or 25%. Got a few more coming in. Okay, it's been 30 seconds. I'm going to give folks a last call. Any last votes? All right, I think we're good. So we'll end the poll there. So we can see here, most people said option C, 19%. The correct answer is actually B, 12%. So if you're one of the 6 folks who said 12%, congratulations, you won that round of Training Jeopardy. So really, that's just one quick example of what this could look like. You'd want to create a slate of several questions, which you can program beforehand using your video conference platform. And then you'd lead people through them as part of a facilitated quiz show. Again, the goal here is for something fun and interactive that reinforces their learning and requires them to physically interact with their screen by clicking a button or typing a response. Okay, so before we hear from Tiffany about her experiences leading trainings for VISTAs, I wanted to share a 4-step process for how you might take an existing in-person training and translate it into a remote learning opportunity. And please note that we're going to follow the same general outline here as the 4 cornerstones we talked about at the beginning. You're going to want to start by revisiting your outcomes. First, think about which ones you can reasonably accomplish remotely. Are any of them especially difficult in an online environment, or can you reshape them to be a better fit? Next, consider the time you have allotted. In many cases, you will have a shorter time period in which to train people online, usually an hour max, than you would have had in person. So you're going to need to adjust your scope based on how much time you can spend keeping people engaged. Along the same vein, you'll want to think about how much content you have time to cover and how deep you can go. This has a lot to do with scope. For example, when we developed this webinar, we had to think about what can we actually cover and what would be too much for people to take in. And then we had to focus our outcomes to be attainable. If you're struggling to get it all fit into one online training, consider breaking up your content into multiple shorter trainings so that you can start off broadly in the first one and then focus in more specifically in subsequent ones. Now for delivery, and this is one of the areas where you'll likely need to make some of the biggest adjustments. Spend some time assessing whether you can make the same information you would have shared in person as accessible via a remote session. How might you best convey important concepts or information? Also think about how you would have shared it in person. Was it going to be a lecture, a discussion? Again, keeping in mind that online audiences are even more distractible, how might you best maintain their attention while still effectively communicating your message? For example, you might incorporate methods like keeping your lecture sections confined to short bursts, interspersing them with videos, images, activities, and discussions so that people stay present and engaged. Now, if you can't utilize the exact same kind of delivery option or activity that you would have used in person, think about which elements of it were most important. Perhaps you would have led a team planning session, assigning each member of the team a distinct role so that they could practice together the concepts you were teaching. It's harder to do this online, so think about why this activity was so important. Was it because they were practicing team dynamics? Because they were getting to know each other better? Because of the specific tasks of the activity? Focus on the top outcomes you were seeking to achieve and then prioritize them as you design online activities to meet the same goals. Now for activities. Be sure to include activities that build connections and engage people. In-person trainings will always benefit from the opportunity to have everyone together in the same room. Not only do they connect through activities and discussions, but they also get to build relationships informally at the beginning, during breaks and meals, and at the end of the day through small talk and check-ins. Given that you'll be missing this automatic benefit during remote trainings, you'll need to build it in yourself through activities during the training and ongoing relationship building and learning opportunities before and after the session. You'll also want to incorporate activities that require your audience to be interactive. This can range from asking them to brainstorm and reflect on specific questions, joining discussion groups or team activities, or even as simple as including online activities that require them to click a button on their keyboard. Ideally, it should be fun and something that provides value to their learning, but at a minimum, it should be an opportunity to help keep them present. Also, continue your team's engagement via feedback from your VISTAs. Ask what worked for them, what didn't. Make it anonymous so that you can ask the brutally honest questions like, where did they get bored? Or when did their attention wander? This will help to make your next remote training even stronger because you'll be learning from the previous one so that you can continue to expand on these 4 crucial steps for translation. And then finally, that 4th step, relevance. Start by revisiting the relevance of your training content and delivery methods. Does it all still align now that it's remote training instead of in person? Has anything changed that you need to address? Ideally, you won't need to make too many changes here, but you may discover some new opportunities or identify some ways to make it even more relevant as you adjust your delivery methods in the previous step. For example, if you took what would have been an in-person group discussion and turned it into an online breakout room, is there an opportunity there for your VISTAs to not only participate in the activity, but also to practice remote facilitation skills? Incorporate new opportunities for even more relevance wherever you can. Okay, so that's the 4 steps. Revisit outcomes and content, select delivery methods, build activities that engage, and recheck relevance. So I'm going to pause here to bring in another voice on this topic.
All right, so now that you've seen the cornerstones of effective training and looked at how to translate delivery and activities for remote training, let's hear from one of your colleagues about some training that she recently developed. Tiffany Okolo is an AmeriCorps VISTA leader serving with the Alliance of Arizona Nonprofits in Phoenix, Arizona. Before joining VISTA, Tiffany worked in student affairs administration and curriculum design while teaching graduate classes as an adjunct instructor at ASU and the Maricopa County Community College District. She completed her first VISTA assignment with St. Mary's Food Bank last year, where she developed a client feedback loop using data from clients in 6 tribal and rural communities. Tiffany, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Andy. I'm excited to have this opportunity to share my experiences. Just so you know, I started my VISTA leader term in June. In my role, I support an intermediary grant with 20 VISTAs serving rural Arizona communities and statewide nonprofits. Most of the Alliance VISTAs serve on projects affecting economic development, education, and healthy futures. I joined the Alliance after stepping away from employment with the U.S. Census Bureau as a partnership specialist. I was honored and humbled when Andy asked me to speak about how I design remote learning experiences. Since starting my year as a VISTA, digital connection has been the only way I can bring all my VISTA members together. And this topic allows me to talk about why I allow Brene Brown's work on wholehearted living to influence how I plan team meetings and engagement opportunities. I hope that part of today's presentation gives everyone some tools you can use to enhance member dedication, satisfaction, growth, and development. When I joined the Alliance, we hosted monthly meetings with our VISTA members spread throughout the great state of Arizona. I knew I wanted to focus on relationship building between members during my year of service because of the lifeline that was given to me by fellow members during my year as a VISTA. But before we could successfully engage in team building, we needed a vision, group agreements, and a purpose. So I designed a learning experience to define the role of peer-to-peer collaboration for our members. As I built the agenda, I thought about organizing the day like a pizza slice. We moved from general to specific and low trust to high trust. I started with introductions and moved on to selecting our team name and creating a team purpose before we got to establishing our group agreements, i.e. how we work together, and deciding how we will work together. Just to summarize, we spent 8 hours covering a range of topics: team name, purpose, group agreements, and collaboration to reach consensus on how we would operate as a team. Here's a little more detail about how I arranged the day. The first thing I had to do was brainstorm a list of topics needed to produce the deliverables. Then I had to order the topics appropriately. In this case, I knew the group could not decide if an outlet for humor would be a group activity unless we had agreements in place on how to communicate with one another. We also could not talk about group agreements until the group had reached consensus in other activities. So I scaffolded activities to make sure the group would walk away with an understanding of how to relate to one another. Once I ordered the topics, I decided on how much time I needed to spend to present the content before selecting a facilitation method. Selecting the activity for each topic, I evaluated the level of trust needed for authentic dialogue to happen. I usually go from small groups to large groups. So we started with individual reflection, moved to groups of 2, i.e. pair and share, then on to teams of 3 to 4 people, which I call huddles, and I ended with every member offering commentary or Hollywood squares. In the case of team formation, it was important for everyone to talk about how they liked to be recognized, because significant variation exists from person to person. But for group agreements, we needed to reach consensus. So huddles are the preferred facilitation method. Then I moved on to collected slide content. I decided on the products or outcomes that would be developed as a result of each topic. In the context of team formation, I knew I wanted to have a list of names for members to rank order following our brainstorming session. So I designed a slide to explain why we needed a name. Content for the slides, I turned to my dear friends to facilitate the discussions needed to develop the work, products, and deliverables. And the attached PowerPoint helps you to see the visuals I used to facilitate the team discussion. Before I go, I wanted to offer another example of how I have built engagement into remote learning opportunities. For this activity, the planning process was bottom up, meaning I created the content for the conversation before selecting the facilitation method. In this case, I needed to measure the value of a conference on professional development. So I created the questions before deciding how to facilitate the discussion. I had 30 minutes for the conference wrap up because my members would experience Zoom fatigue if I went any longer. My members like to talk to everyone at least once during our team meeting, so I couldn't use one facilitation method for all 5 questions. So I decided to use 3 different group conversation methods. I allocated 5 minutes to a pair and share for the first 2 questions. I created a 15-minute huddle for the next 2 questions. And then I rounded out the progression with Hollywood squares to facilitate the answers to the last question.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. That was really helpful, and it's really useful to see those real-world examples of how you've incorporated team building and activities into your trainings. Okay, so to recap what we've covered today, we've introduced the cornerstones of effective remote trainings. We examined how to incorporate engaging remote activities to support learning. And we looked at how to translate an in-person training into a remote version. And Tiffany has also shared those invaluable real-world examples of all of this in practice. We hope that the topics we've covered today will prepare you for creating dynamic remote trainings of your own. So before we get to your questions though, I wanted to remind you of the handouts to help you apply what you've learned. And you should see a link in your chat there where you can download a copy of the slides and the handouts. First, we have a handout that is a how-to guide for you to translate your own in-person training into a remote session. It also includes a list of resource links on topics like adult learning styles and online activity ideas. Tiffany has also very kindly shared the 2 presentations she developed for her team training. One is the overall presentation for the training, and the other contains the questions for the reflection activity at the end of her training. And then, of course, there's also a copy of the slides from this presentation.
All right, so we've reached the end of the formal presentation, and before we dive into your questions, I'd like to invite you to complete a short evaluation of this webinar. I want to make sure you know that I read every single evaluation that gets submitted, and particularly if you have ideas for topics you'd like to see presented here, I'd love to see your ideas. The survey will appear in your browser window once you exit the Zoom session. And we'll also put it there in the link, the link in the chat. All right, so we'd like to hear any questions that you may have either for Erin or Tiffany. We'll use the chat feature for the Q&A again. And if for some reason you don't see it, you know the button is there at the bottom of the screen with the chat bubble icon. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, I just again want to thank Tiffany and Erin for their time and putting all this information together. It's a big topic and one that clearly is one that's so relevant for VISTA leaders, particularly now with so many people teleserving and teams working remotely. It's something that everyone's being called on to do, whether training was part of what you were doing before or if remote work was part of what you were doing before or not. It is something that so many of us are involved with, and particularly VISTA leaders are being called on to take a leadership role. So hopefully we've been able to give you all lots of ideas and a framework that you can use for developing your own trainings. All right, so first question comes in from, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, is it Teresa? She asks, how do you do an activity with just 2 people? So it's a small team, only two people in the training. Any thoughts on that, Erin?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's there are some real opportunities there with having a small group. So you can do activities like role plays. You can do the walking through of scenarios. Obviously, your discussions will be very accessible. I think games are still accessible as well. And in fact, in that case, it can be whoever buzzes in first or answers first if you're doing a quiz. Online scavenger hunts, I didn't cover them in the presentation today, but they are in your handout. There's some resources there. That can be something fun where it can be, you know, who can complete it first, and then you come back together and share what you found. So I think it can be a lot of sort of friendly competition type of things because the 2 of them are the team. But then also lots of collaborative opportunities where the 3 of you can really do planning in live time together as opposed to needing to send them off to do it and come back. So really a lot of the things we covered today, you can just actually do in live time with that small of a group.
All right, great. Next up, Kensley has kind of a related question, but it's, I think, more about breakout groups. How do you facilitate small group or one-on-one discussions over Zoom? Can you create groups and have participants discuss through the chat box only to their partner or small group?
That's a great question. I don't believe you can split the chat into breakout groups, but I could be wrong. And if I am wrong, I apologize. Fortunately, what I don't know, Zoom has answered. They have absolutely fantastic tutorials online, as well as YouTube is your best friend for finding walkthroughs on how to find the hidden pieces of Zoom and other webinar platforms. I know that most of them, you can create breakout groups where they can talk to each other in separate groups. And what I would suggest is maybe you assign roles for each breakout group and ask them to self-select someone to be the facilitator and self-select someone to be the reporter. And so that when they go off into their groups, the facilitator takes the lead on leading the discussion and the reporter has the role of coming back and sharing what the group discussed. So the chat, my apologies, I don't know the answer to that, but the breakout rooms, I would assign roles, and that way you can have a little bit of leadership development as well as some structure to those discussions.
Great. And Aaron, I'll jump in and offer another idea here. One that I just learned about yesterday. In my office now, we're using Microsoft Teams. I know that a lot of organizations are. And so we were doing a training with a bunch of people, and we wanted to have breakout groups. There's not actually a specific breakout feature within Teams, but one of my clever colleagues figured out, like, oh, well, we'll just create 5 simultaneous meetings in Teams, and we'll generate a link for each one of those separate meetings, and at the point during the session when it's time to go there, people were already pre-assigned and everybody had the link, and we just went to the second meeting. The first one got put on hold. We were in the second meeting, so we had our own chat, we had our own audio, we could do our work there, collaborate, and then when that was done, we just left that and we went back and joined the original meeting. So it was pretty cool, very simple to do.
I love that idea. And you could do that with Zoom too. Just create separate meetings for each group and give them the link and say, okay, go off to that meeting and then come back to this one. Great idea. Andy.
All right. Great. Yeah. Well, I didn't come up with it. One of my clever colleagues did. Let's see. Jennifer has a question. How do I handle VISTAs who don't share their screen during Zoom calls? Do you think it's important to share a screen? Our group is about 10 people. Any thoughts on that one, Erin?
Yeah, that's such a sticky topic right now, and it's something people are talking a lot about, because on one hand, being able to see each other reinforces our connections, and on the other, there is a very real phenomena of Zoom fatigue, where the needing to be seen the whole time on every meeting can actually wear people down. My approach to it would be to establish as a group what the expectations are. So it isn't dictating to them, hey, turn on your camera. It could just be, let's talk together about the importance of it and what we want our ground rules to be. And perhaps it's, maybe you come up together as a team, you decide the standard is people turn on their cameras, but for a set number of or amount of time. So if we're meeting for an hour, the expectation is for at least a half hour that your camera is on. Or it might be that, hey, let's all have our camera on for the full call, except unless you need to take a break, like, hey, I need a Zoom fatigue break, and you put it in the chat so that everyone knows what's going on. I just saw someone note in the chat that sometimes it's connectivity issues, and that is very true. Sometimes turning off your camera allows you to have better connection. So I think it's really just about setting expectations and then communicating. If someone needs to turn it off, there's a reason why they're turning it off. Either they're saying, hey, folks, turning mine off for a little while because I'm making a cup of tea, or my internet is slow, or hey, I just need a little bit of a break from the visual, but I'll be back soon. But you've established that expectation of be here if you can be here, and how much of that time we should spend seeing each other versus just hearing each other.
All right, we've got a number of other questions lined up. I'll say now we'll do our best to answer all of them. If we run out of time, I'll do a quick closing, and Erin and I, we're happy to stay on for a few extra minutes to answer the rest of the questions. So just wanted to give you that heads up. Megan, or maybe it's Megan, I'm not sure, asks what slideshow program we use. So we use Microsoft PowerPoint to develop our slideshow, and then of course we're using Zoom to present it. Jan has a question. I don't know if we'll be able to go into this here, asking us to explain the pros and cons or differences of different training platforms like Zoom and GoToTraining and the others. Erin, I don't know if there's any quick way to talk about all the differences.
No, I mean, and honestly, a lot of it comes down to user preference. Like, what are you most comfortable with? Some people love Zoom, some love GoToMeeting. There's one called Big Marker that I've used before that people like. So I would say my best advice is not a very fun answer, but it's really to go do a quick internet search using Google, whatever your preferred search engine is, because there are folks out there that this is exactly what they write about, and they've done like walkthroughs of like, this platform has this, but this one has this. So there isn't one gold standard where I would say this is the one to use. I would instead say go read a little bit of research, see what how they compare them. Almost all of them have free trials where you can try it and see if you like it. So I would say read about it and then try it out, and ultimately it comes down to what you like and what's accessible for your audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that advice I think works well for the next question too. Taylor asks, what is the best kind of group messaging service to use? And again, you might turn to your team and say, hey, what are you all comfortable or familiar with using? Have you found something that really works well? Get them involved in that decision-making process, get them to maybe you divvy it up and each one gets a free trial membership and tests out a different platform for the meeting or the messaging service, and then you convene back and compare notes. So as the leader, you don't have to do all that work yourself, but you can certainly call on your team for their insights as well.
Yeah, and to add to that, Andy, one of the rules of thumb here is use whatever they're going to actually use. Choose whatever they're going to actually use. If you may not love Facebook, but if everybody's on Facebook and they say, yeah, I'm actually likely to see it there and I'm more likely to respond there, then that may help you choose where you end up going.
Great, good advice. Daniel has a really great question. It's one that we've looked at over the years. How do you prepare for potential setbacks, such as a power outage, low broadband or internet connection, or difficulty in screen sharing? Do you suggest co-hosts if possible, or providing handouts ahead of time? What's advisable? So we do all of that. We have a production team here, and they have redundancy. They log in on a couple different computers with a couple different accounts. So if one gets disconnected, another one is there. They've got somebody in a separate location as a backup. So if the power goes out in one part of town or in one city, hopefully the person in the other location will still be on. We have our script worked out in advance. So we've got our talking points and it's shared among the whole team. So if one of us drops off and we can't get them back on, we can sort of pitch in and cover until that person gets back. Yeah, and having handouts, sharing a copy of the slides is great because, you might experience some kind of internet outage and you'd be aware of it, right? And all of the participants would. But the same could happen to one of your participants as well, and you wouldn't necessarily know it, that, a couple of your participants dropped off because there was an internet outage or whatever. You wouldn't know it. But if you had already shared, or if they were able to download the materials in advance, and there was a way to join by phone, they could follow along pretty well. Erin, other thoughts or ideas about how to prepare for those kinds of situations?
Absolutely, yeah. So, and for many of these situations, you might be the only trainer and your team members might be the participants. So if you are the trainer and you drop out, what you potentially could do is just have a standard expectation that, hey, if there's an internet issue, I will try to get a message to you to let you know I'm not able to get on. But to basically let them know, use the time we would have done for the training as a group planning or check-in opportunity. Like basically turn it into, you have it on your calendar, use it as an opportunity to connect. If someone else drops out, another good practice is anytime you're doing a training, make sure you record it. And you can set it up to auto record on most platforms. And that way anyone who couldn't be there can still participate and watch the recording. And then as your bandwidth allows, your personal bandwidth, not your computer bandwidth, you can set up, share your notes in advance, share the trainings in advance. But in most situations, I would say just reschedule it and just in the moment, let them know, hey, I can't be there, so still meet and have an informal check-in. Or if someone else can't be there, I'll share the recording.
Great, thank you for that. I think we've touched on all the questions, so we can go ahead and wrap up. I will mention that thank you to all of you who shared ideas about some of the group messaging service options that are out there. I'm sure those will be greatly appreciated. All right, so that wraps up the webinar. I really want to thank our presenter, Erin Barnhart, and our production team, as well as our guest speaker, Tiffany Harvey, for all of your work in preparing for today. And I'd like to thank you for participating and sharing your effective practice ideas here with your fellow leaders. Next month, we are presenting a webinar on working with site supervisors and identifying ways to navigate those sometimes complex working relationships. That'll take place on Thursday, October 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we hope to see you then. Thank you all for joining us.